Hello. I would like to share with you today the imaginary world of daydreaming that the French Impressionist symbolist music brings me to imagine, as if I create ephemeral worlds within a sound, or combination of sounds, harmony, melody, pulse, a hemiola. It's so incredibly sound painting that you feel in real time a storyteller, a painter, harpist. That's one for the plucking of the sounds. And then if you put the pedal, you take off obviously the dampers. But if you combine the harmonic progression of the connected soft sounds that don't have an attack, not a tonguing in the reed, just a, it's almost like horns, but without the attack of the note. Wow. So this kind of clarity, transparency, as if you see probably a translucent flower, a leaf lit by the morning sun with the dew on it. And why not? I know it sounds cheesy to depict one's own imaginary fantasies. And doesn't matter, in fact, what you imagine. If you count the beats, if you imagine colors, if you, whatever. But I think that there is this moment before you open the piece, like in this case the minuet of the Sonatine by Ravel. You're marveled by the sounds that are produced because you dream them, daydream them, imagine them, then they come out more or less according to the instrument, perhaps according to the acoustic, mostly according to the tuning too. And this neoclassical elegance in Ravel writing music of the French clavecinist from 2 centuries before him, like in the Tombeau de Couperin, also minuet. Of course, that has a B section in minor. And isn't the minor incredibly meaningful by being modal? They have so many minors. They have only one major. But the contrast of the subtle and the evident are very interesting. And in the sonatines, he doesn't have a trio for this. It's more an evocative dance of short, long, on the downbeat, not upbeat as a imaginary short, long, with the long being the downbeat, but the short on the downbeat, and then tossing it on the long of the second half, 2/3 of the beat. 1, 2, 3. Then the anticipation before the beat and the harmony, which comes just after, but then by then, the flat of the melody decayed. So you have to play the chord softer so that you can bridge over the decay and re-rise the melodic line, which should be not I believe, hope that you might agree, doesn't need to project very loudly. It should be part of the harmonization, and then slowly, immediately, but very subtly, escape the harmonization and become a melody of its own. Some octaved and some alone, and some octaved and alone. So the pizzicato sound of the the legato sound of these resonant chords that are sounding more like harmonium or organ to me, with the harp for the subtle precision of the sound, and the melody sung without makeup, without expression of hairpin. Of course, the pedal is such an important factor because it can drown all, or it can be overly dry. And Ravel doesn't call for a dancing on that very piece. It's a stylized piece in the pulse of a minuet. It's like Chopin's mazurkas are stylized Polish folk music into Parisian style, 19th century. I think that the homage to the old music by Ravel is in fact extremely subtly provocative. It's not Bach with wrong notes, as people made fun of Stravinsky's neoclassicism, which was unfair in my personal taste, but regardless, everybody's opinion, especially when backed up, has to be heard. Not always agreed or agree to disagree. It's not the point. The point is that the music exists. You have to serve it, love it, play it, sing it, write it, perhaps comment it, teach it, record it, and then you have to be convinced as if it comes from you. You cannot play something that you criticize, because you'll constantly try to prove your point rather than just serving what the music is by itself, regardless who wrote it, in what style. And if there is osmosis between you and the piece, then the two hands cannot disconnect. It becomes one single piece of one's expression and appropriation, as if one's composition. Isn't this so beautiful? Oh, regardless of how much I know it, or I knew it, or it's been a companion for 40 more years, it shines by its freshness. And I was, as child, probably as fresh as the piece in my childish psyche. And now that I am not, I find that there is a cruel irony, while bittersweet tender, of the piece looking at me saying, hey, you think that I was love at first sight, but I'm love at first sight for many other pianists, all generations. There is no exclusivity. It's universal. But there is a sense of appropriation when you discover it and you love it and you want to share it. Then you want to learn it, then you want to study it, then you want to understand it, then you want to learn how to pedal it without too much, but and at some point you overcomplicate it because you sort of dissect it into so many details, and then you have to rebuild it together and let it flow. The melodic bass with the theme and the harmonization. Whispered with the fingers playing from the keys, not from above, deep inside to create this resonance of sound without attack. It's kind of dolce, dolcissimo, and the melody. The melody rising out of the harmony, and I find in this texture the harp and the organ constantly combining or contradicting, the resonance with the plucking. And the piano as an instrument, in fact, is the perfect, obviously, thank God it is, since it's written for it. But still, it's not so evident evidence about it. Because the piano, of course, doesn't have a long resonance since it sounds decays. So a certain tempo has to be in charge of the, taken account of the decay of the melody. So aesthetically, of course, you can argue about what is a minuet tempo, but it's not to be danced. But it's evoked. Okay, so it could be. Or it could be. Of course, it is a middle slow movement of three, moderate and fast. And the sonatine, many people often, I think, perhaps I'm wrong, think of it as a small piece because sonatine is a term of endearment, not a sonata. But it's so intense in its brevity. It's so much is said in so little that the intensity of the statements doesn't have the rapport of length to express them. It's just a very strange feeling. If you're not always mentally ready to be ahead of each section, you missed something, and then by the time you finish this miniature, which is so full of all the parts that you have to be mentally ahead each section in order to prepare it. It's merging in the traffic of the next section and find not only a sound quality, a dreamed sound, daydreamed, but also a phrase direction, anticipation. And this kind of choice of tempo versus phrasing, length of sound, instrumental imagination are all very good feeders for the imagination of the performer. I still think the harp, when Ravel wrote the introduction and Allegro, what a beautiful piece. Or his string quartet. Like Mozart, he has the capacity to write with very few notes so much. He doesn't need heavy structures, heavy textures, long statements. When you visit his house in Montfort-l'Amaury, you realize there is a portrait of Haydn, from all people, next to his piano. And when he used to be asked by the visitors during his lifetime until 1937, of course, but why, Maître, do you have a painting of Haydn? And he said, supposedly, because he expressed himself within the form and never needing to go overboard. I think this kind of elegance of not overstating and putting just everything in proportions is so evident in his music. For instance, after this opening you have, or and then you have the mirrored or echo cell. Not only, but also for structural organization of group of bars, but also as a term of endearment. Until the third time you have the melody in the inner voice. And this little bridge is so incredibly rich in its simplicity. If he had written all in E flat minor with the C flat, everybody would have found it anyway beautiful, because it is meaningful, tender, sad, dark, whatever. But the music by itself is what it is, major, minor. And these 3/3 major ones in the inner voices of this string quartet writing would be second violin and viola, while violin 1 and cello do the melody and the circle of fifths, root position, demonstration of the cadence. That little touch of major with the C natural flat 6, when you just heard it flat 6 into then therefore sharp 6, I meant. And the leading tone dropping, not, nor, harmonic minor. It's not just, and it is, harmonically explainable, but I think what is marvelous is that in a miscellaneous bridge in an inner voice, he highlights something that touches your heart like a flower smell. So of course, by pinpointing it, I make bigger deal from it than it is for its function. But how not to get so moved by the quality put in every detail? It's like gourmet. It's not harmony for harmony's sake, it's simply atmospheric. Now that I played it many times, I'll play it once through with it within its own flow. That is the ultimate daydream section. In many cases, when you read this kind of augmentation of the theme, it would look very much like an expression of a polyphonic contrapuntal demonstration of know-how. But in Ravel, strangely, it almost doesn't matter that it is the theme in augmentation. It's almost as if it's there only for chosen notes rather than obliged notes through a structural imitation, but in twice lower rhythm with the top part. So he plays with the resonances so well into organizing through the range, rare for the sonatine, which I think beyond the brevity of its form is probably called sonatine because in most of the movements the two hands are constantly in the same place, as if one hand of 10 fingers, like the opening of the first movement with crossed thumbs, and then you have the opening of the second movement, also centered with the two hands together, not spread. And in the third movement, again. Now, of course, with some exceptions, just like this, which explains the rule. Like some kind of French horn muted with perhaps the harp in harmonics. At least in my imagination. Probably not realistic orchestrally. It's so sensorial. And his return to the recapitulation is prepared with the repetitivity of the ostinato bass, and the harmonization differs from the opening, with the hint of the model compared to the opening. It's like he seems to colorize harmonically. I don't know which senses, olfactorial or the eyes, or combined, or close your eyes and imagine, and you just float in some daydream, literally, not have to do it only artificially by playing it, because it calls for it. At least I believe that. And when he could have changed again like the beginning, but he changes to be major, half minor, of course he changes that too into the subdominant. It's very, very much as if he wants to still tell us, I'm doing it as it's supposed to be. In the recapitulation, in a different key. It's just incredibly meticulous while inspired, at the same time intuitive and so sensorial for the harmonizations, and so obedient in the structured form. It's and the melodic lines are unforgettable, obviously. That's why everything holds on that. And how much of these F and F flat with the pedal or the acoustic or the changing pedal, but shouldn't be dry, shouldn't be wet, shouldn't be drawn. It's easy to say, right? Difficult to do. And here he has the fifth of the accompaniment, kissing, which is not a musicological term, obviously, in the middle of the melodic note and the harmonization of the right hand. He does that in the seventh Valse Noble, where he interferes with the melodic line in a moment of breath, wild breath, and then the E of the fifth in A major becomes part of the melody. Whenever here it is kissing that dissonance, it's not the word obviously, but he uses it in a bittersweet. It's really incredibly sensual, sensorial, and at the same time incredibly ephemeral. It's almost like as if there is no dissonant consonant. Um, there is only probably light and shadow at most, like chiaroscuro for the painters. Echo cell. Again, the organ with the German sixth and the harp, like tears or perhaps just drops. And magnificently luminous D flat major, not finishing soft as you could imagine. He wouldn't do such a cheesy thing. He does this incredible blossoming. And here he states the fifth, because he didn't have a middle pedal. If he had, he could have called it here and then. But the decay needs to be almost denied by the crescendo of the short long. These rich, juicy harmonies. So luminous and hopeful and emphatic, but not that much. You keep it until it not dies too much, so you can. This piece, this music, this texture, this statement, this emotion, this connection between thematic materials that by themselves don't get too much developed but stated, and they enter in a very elegant way with a harmonic progression without to overstate, overdevelop. They just are there in proportions of incredible subtle taste. It could be elitist, it's not. It could be narcissist, it's not. It's incredibly almost clear, transparent. You can read through the leaf and you see, you guess, you imagine, you dream it. What else can you do? Of course, you have the score, and I remember as a child discovering it, struggling through how to play these transparencies and these lightnesses and these shiverings of nature, like you could feel the smell, the wind, the rain, the drops, the dew. Or you imagine it, or regardless what you imagine, it drives you to make it, to play it, closest to what you dream. And of course get frustrated because it doesn't play well and pianos are uneven, the action, the everything. And then now, 40 some years later, it's as fresh as the first day I discovered it. So when Mademoiselle Boulanger was saying some pieces are good companions for the life's trip, I consider that Ravel is part of them. Regardless of your opinion about his style, is it necessarily good to be or not neoclassical philosophically? Okay, I agree. Perhaps progressive is better for some and regressive for some. But for what it states itself, it's so beautifully meaningful. Just touching, moving, almost taking your heart for the few minutes that you share it. What a luck to have received that from him for us.